Hi, I'm Chijoke Williams, she, her, and this show is presented to you by One Roof Chicago. By the time you see this, it will likely be about 2 weeks after Giving Tuesday, but today is Giving Tuesday. So the following message is for everyone today, but we urge you to listen to this. It's an evergreen message. How about that? This Giving Tuesday, we'd like to stress the importance of vision and action. As various political threats hover over our community like a far-right sword of Damocles, we're faced with several questions. What can we do to keep each other safe? What does a safe space look like when the majority of our country seems to have voted in direct opposition to our safety? What can we do to resist these threats unraveling the safety we've worked so hard to weave into our communities? Here at One Roof Chicago, we've concluded that a brighter future can be achieved through two critical elements: vision and solidarity. Vision allows us to lay the groundwork for our goals, keeping our grand plans in mind as a beacon of hope, even as the world changes. Any great endeavor starts as a dream, and the magic of a shared vision is that an entire community can share and invest in that same vision. Solidarity allows us all to lend a hand to pull that shared vision into reality. Through the power of community, we can amplify our collective voice and bolster our ability to create change. When we stand together, we can pool our resources, consolidate wisdom, and support each other in the face of political hostility. Every year, on this day, various nonprofits make an appeal for aid. This Giving Tuesday, One Roof Chicago is one of them. Your support not only fuels our current efforts in building Chicago's most ambitious intergenerational queer home, but also builds the foundation for our shared vision. Given the current political climate, affirming housing is going to be more important than ever in the coming years. Now is the time to give and get involved, to ensure that we have the funds and support that we need to pave the way toward a brighter, safer, more affirming Chicago. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching One Roof Chicago. And you can donate at oneroofchicago.org/your-donation-matters. Again, that's oneroofchicago.org/your-donation-matters. And remember, none of us are ever truly alone, no matter how much those in power may want us to feel that way. We can do this together. Now that that part's over, I'd like to reflect on a few different ideas. I have a feeling these will be important in the coming months and years, and so I'd like to urge us all to think about them now and to continue to do so. I touched a little on solidarity just now. I'd like to expand that to intersectional solidarity. For the people who want to persecute us, the differences in our identities don't matter. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transmasc, transfemme, they're all the same to the people who would rather we didn't exist. It makes no sense to divide our community among identity lines. Carrying that a step further, I'd like to urge everyone to do the following. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Listen to Black women. Read about Black feminism and intersectional feminism. Read Audre Lorde, Assata Shakur, Roxane Gay, Tressie McMillan Cottom. Learn about activism in this country from the perspective of those who have always been at the forefront, though seldom listened to. I understand, I seem biased, but you can go all the way back to the original suffrage movement in America and every consecutive women's rights or civil rights movement, and you will see that Black women have carried those efforts. You will also see that, after each major movement, those efforts dissolved into infighting because white feminists didn't want to share a movement with Black women. Sound familiar? There is historical precedent in feminism and queer activism in nearly every movement you can think of our efforts gaining momentum, power, and influence truly beginning to make a difference before they fell apart because some members refused to stand in community with other members. Examples? Fine. Cis women who didn't want to stand with trans women. Cis gays who didn't want to share community with trans people. White women who didn't want to stand with Black women. Poor and lower class white people who didn't want to stand with poor and lower class Black people, or immigrants, or anyone else they didn't share skin-deep physical characteristics with. Even men who don't want to stand with women and view feminism as some sort of poisonous insult to their masculinity. There are so many more examples of this, but in each, you see people with slightly more social capital distancing themselves from those they deemed as less or undeserving or so other that they didn't deserve rights or justice, all to hold on to the little perceived power that they had. There is historical precedent for this, but we do not have to repeat this cycle. Quite frankly, we can't afford to. We've come to a crossroads in history where we have to come together as a cohesive community. We cannot keep giving into fear and hate and petty power plays that make us feel like we're elevating ourselves by diminishing our allies, while all along we stay in exactly the same place. The alternative is allowing the far right to mobilize and, while we're distracted with infighting, strip us of our rights one by one. This is not sensationalism. This is not shock journalism. This is a playbook that they have documented and gleefully publicly distributed. Look up Project 2025 when you get a chance. And brace yourself. It is bad. But for now, let's focus on the steps we can take to present a united front. I urge us all, myself included, to reach out to those in our community who we know the least. Instead of making assumptions about their identity or playing off of what we've heard from others, talk to them. Allowing ourselves to be educated is going to be key in dispelling ignorance and seeing our community members as real people, rather than the two-dimensional characters so many of us tend to default to. And I am not coming for anyone specifically. There is a phenomenon in psychology called in-group, out-group bias. We are psychologically wired to see those who share identity with us, to look like us, as more worthy of sympathy, of resources, of justice, and those who do not share those resources, or rather those characteristics, as unworthy. But the thing is, we have grown beyond our basic wiring in so many ways. We are no longer smashing rocks together to create fire. We have more potential than what is written into our DNA, and I know we can do better. So, the default is no longer an excuse. Just because people don't look like us does not mean that we cannot reach out to them. So, if you've never spoken to a trans person, do that. Respectfully. Actually, better yet, do some reading first from reputable sources like GLAAD, that's GLAAD, the National Center for Transgender Equality, and Trans Lifeline. Then talk to a trans person. Also, if you're white and you think you know Black history, do not just trust what your school taught you. Please just don't. Look up Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, Bayard Rustin, Shirley Chisholm, Marsha P. Johnson. If you want to look into Black history, Black activism, intersectional identity throughout time, look at these people. Because not all of them were just Black. History loves, in retrospect, loves making people out to be more flat than they were, for their identities to be simpler. But each of these people will revolutionize the way that you thought of the civil rights movement, of history, of slavery, of the way this country has grown, and if you're a white person who was taught about Black history from school, the things that we used to have to put up with in order to achieve growth. And if you're a cis man, actually learn about feminism. I'm talking first wave, second wave, intersectional, and trans-inclusive, to name a few movements. Each of those movements, as they move forward in time, had their issues, but all of them were on the right track as time moved on. And especially the first few, all of them, were carried by Black women. Feminism is the idea that both genders, or all genders, should be equal. I don't know what toxic ideas many men have or are carrying, but it comes down to the idea of equality, not men taking the position of women or I honestly can't even speak to the talking points that the most toxic men have because I don't know them, but I do know that somehow feminism threatens men to the point that they use it as an insult when it should be an honor. So, first wave, second wave, intersectional, trans-inclusive, to name a few. In all of these cases, it's important to do some of the heavy lifting yourself. That way, all of the emotional labor doesn't fall to the people you're talking to. But still, It's important. If you think you know your community members, but when you try to think about their identities, you kind of just remember what you heard on Fox News or like a friend of a friend of a friend, that's not enough. You really need to learn. We all really need to learn. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. Overall, find the people who carry each movement and learn about them. Internalize their struggles. Educate yourselves on their identities and what makes them unique. And most importantly, keep your mind open to what you have in common with them. I guarantee it's more than you think. We've all been left on the sidelines before. We've all felt ignored or misunderstood. But the solution isn't bunching together exclusively with people who share our exact identity and rejecting those we see as other. We cannot afford that sort of tribalism anymore. The best thing we can do is learn about our neighbors, community members, comrades, and allies. We have to come together as best we can, rewrite this national legacy of insularity and infighting, and support each other in these trying times. The alternative is that this country becomes a much, much scarier place, where we all wonder what we could have done to change things. I know I'm heaping a lot of ideas on you, and this may very well sound like I am making a mountain out of a molehill, but in the process of reading, in the process of educating yourself, you will see that we have so much growing to do, but also how much potential we have. So, while I have given you a lot of different ideas, and it's going to be a lot to process, if you're open to it, I know some folks with a few more. Yeah, it's book time. So, I've talked about a few different people today, and I'd love to break them down a bit. I spoke about Audre Lorde, icon, a Black woman, a queer woman, someone who has poetry that describes the nation and the experience of a Black woman in a way that is just beautiful and heartbreaking and fantastic. I have the collective poems of Audre Lorde, which you can find at any, or at least most libraries, and just a bit of a description of Audre Lorde from someone who is not me, just so that you know that while I may be biased, there is value to this. The first declaration of a Black lesbian feminist identity took place in these poems and set the terms beautifully, forcefully, for contemporary multicultural and pluralist debate. The idea there of her being already having an intersectional identity, of being a Black lesbian woman, but the fact that it is multicultural and pluralist debate. She is not just talking about her own identity. She is talking about all women, all lesbians, all femmes, and all people who can benefit from a lot of this knowledge. That's one. There's also the selected works of Audre Lorde. I cannot recommend enough. She has a lot of different essays and a lot of poetry, but I would highly recommend that you pick up this one just as a starting place. If you are someone who hypothetically knows queer people or knows a friend of a friend who is queer, but doesn't quite understand it, or queerness makes you uncomfortable in a way that you can't quite verbalize, I would love to recommend Queer Love in Color by Jamal Jordan. Fantastic book, incredible depictions of lesbian, gay, trans relationships. And I think the thing that I love most about it is that it really shows, not to use a phrase that is a bit overused, but it really shows that love is love. The people that we would do anything for, regardless of race or gender or experience, I would say that throughout time and throughout cultures, love is love. It feels the same. And queer love is just as strong and just as motivating and just as beautiful as any and every other type of it. So, again, Queer Love in Color, Jamal Jordan. It's just gorgeous. There are so many different couples of different ages, and if you are not someone who knows any queer people but would love to learn, read this first, internalize the ideas, and then, after a bit more research, maybe look around, see if the world looks a little bit different. And there's How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind. If we're talking about revolutionary strategies, if we're talking about the fact that being a Black person in America is already a difficult identity to hold, but being a Black person who wants to change the world in America, reading this along with anything about or by Assata Shakur will revolutionize the way that you see activism in America, how you see Blackness in America, and especially how you view yourself as someone who can create change and inspire change. Again, cannot recommend enough. And for all my Octavia Butler fans out there, and I'm including myself in that, huge fan, there's Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. This book basically takes the ideas and strategies that were described in Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, which are incredible books that started off as fiction written by Octavia Butler, but somehow predicted very much the position that we're in. From climate change and natural disasters to political upheaval to a politician in 2024, and she wrote this in the 1960s and 70s, to a politician whose motto is "Make America Great Again." She wrote this so far ahead of time, and yet she remains so prescient that she predicted the political, environmental, and national state that we would be in. Is it a little worse in the book? Yes. Is it exactly where we seem to be going right now? Yes. And so, that being said, in the book, the main character comes up with a way of living, an emergent strategy, one might say, that basically outlines how one can come together with their community to create a safer, more holistic, more practical way of living than what we often have in terms of activism, community building, all of it. And it is also just a really good read. If you often feel like, the world shouldn't be like this, capitalism sucks, I wish I could think of a way to make the world better, but I don't know where to start. Emergent Strategy advises that we start on the ground floor. Start in your home. Start in your community. Start with the people you know. Learn them, learn from them, and slowly as we build those ground level community bonds, we can build outward. But it's most important to start with what we know, with whom we know, and if we don't know them that well, with who we should know. If they're our neighbors, the effort is worth it. Now, again, I know this has been a lot, but I'd like to end with a poem from Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. A complex movement. Over and over again, it becomes known the peace we seek is seeking us. The joy of full bud, awaiting our attention. Justice in our hands, longing to be practiced. The whole world learning, from within, this thrilling moat in the universe. Laboratory, labyrinth, internalized demands. You are the one you are waiting for. Externalized love. Bind us together into a greater self. A complex movement. A generative abundance. An embodied evolution. Learn to be here. Critique is a seductress. Her door is always open. So what if you get some? We're going further, past reform. To wonder. This requires comprehension that cannot fit in words. Out beyond our children, beyond the end of time, there is a ceaseless cycle, a fractal of sublime. And we come to create it, to soil our hands and faces, loving, loving, and loving ourselves in all our places. Thank you for watching. I've given you a lot to think about. I have a lot to think about. But if I can leave you with anything, it is that we are all capable of enacting change. And at this point, it may very well be our responsibility to enact change. The alternative is a country that I think we can barely imagine. Normally, the show has a guest with me, someone older to describe how the country has gotten this far in terms of activism, someone younger to describe how they feel about the current state of things and what activism they would like to change things. The next episode, I will also have a guest, but I'd like us all to reflect on everything we've talked about today. What's brought us so far? where we'd like to go, and where we are now, and what, in between all of those temporal places, we can do to make the future a little bit brighter. Thank you for watching. I'm Chijoke Williams, she, her. And remember, we can build a better world, brick by brick.